All right, welcome everybody. Today's Asks in Praxis, some new shiny objects. We're going to talk about Microsoft Loop, a new creation from Microsoft. And when we first looked at it, we thought it was kind of a solution in search of a use case. We've since kind of explored it a bit, and we'd love to talk to you about what we found. So for those of you who aren't here all the time, there's only 6 of us, but we bring a pretty wide range of views to things based on the stuff that we're good at. Like we each bring our individual skills to this, so you'll get a lot of different points of view on the same subject matter here. Here's what we're going to cover today. First, what is Loop? What is Microsoft Loop? We'll talk about those use cases, some observations we've found in testing it and playing with it and working with it a bit ourselves. And then there's a what to use when dimension to it, because there's things in Loop that you can do with other capabilities inside of Microsoft 365. So we'll talk about how to choose the right tool. Let's talk about what is Loop.
I made this slide, so I guess I'll talk.
Yeah,
so,
I have to. Yeah.
Right now, the only place you can actually see and touch Loop is in Microsoft Teams. And you'll notice that there's that little purple icon that's down on the bottom middle that allows you to add a Loop component to a chat. And in this case, I clicked on task list and task list. Yes, that's a phrase. And got what's on the right side. So you get these you get these little components, these little widgets that are very dynamic, and people from wherever they're exposed can type in them, and it's like Uber collaborative content management. You know, it's like what happens when you're inside a Word document and you've got multiple people in there and you're all typing at the same time. It's that kind of a feel, and right now you can use them in the context of a Teams chat, and there are 6 of those 6 options there. They will be eventually available in other places, and we'll talk more about that.
So first piece is these Loop components. Second piece, Loop alerts.
Yeah, just calling out that when you mention in Loops, you still are going to get alerts. So this was an update that I got from being mentioned in a task list. I did not receive any alerts that someone contributed to a loop that I started. So it is specific right now to those mentions.
At least that's something.
Yeah, that task, flip back up one slide, Mike, just because I want to be difficult. So it was interesting because under that assigned to field, it's actually just a text field. It's not a people picker like those of us who use SharePoint would expect. So we were playing with it yesterday, and you had to mention somebody to actually pull up a name that wasn't just text.
And one thing to know about the loops in Teams is they're not available in channels yet, and they're not available to use with guests. So if you have an external meeting with a client, for example, you'll still see the loop component if you're the host of the meeting, and you can still add it to the chat, but none of the attendees will be those guests will be able to access it.
So we can't start a loop with everybody on this call and have us all type something, which is probably a good thing, really.
Well, I think, Mark, that's a good segue to the next thing, like places where loops are surfaced. And we saw this animation from Microsoft, and I think it just collectively gave us a headache to watch this happen.
I nearly had a seizure. Yeah. There should have been a warning, the strobe light thing. There should have been.
And I think, to be honest, I think this is part of the problem with Loop is that they've made it so demoable and so cute that you sort of look at this and you say, I mean, once you get past the fact that there are a whole bunch of people doing a bunch of stuff and the text is flying around, you try to figure out, well, but what does that translate into? What does that mean? And this is a Loop page, which is sort of the next level up building block. A Loop page could be made up of multiple Loop components. So we could have a bulleted list, a paragraph, a task list, all inside a Loop page, and everybody could be high-fiving each other, adding emojis
this
like
is marketing
crazy
gone
people.
Off the rails. Like,
yeah.
Somebody needs to pull those people back a little.
Yeah, and I think so I might not be the target market because I might be too old. But this actually, Mark said that the loop was marketable. I feel like they pushed me away with this. Like if it was less marketable, this would be less obnoxious and there'd be less. It's like we looked at this and tried to figure out exactly what it was that we were looking at and why we would do this. And then we kind of had to deconstruct it and say, well, we would never do all of these things all at once. Little slices here and there might be helpful. I think, marketing just,
well, and that's part of the question that we were kicking around yesterday is, who are they really marketing this to? And, maybe we collectively are all too old or something. I mean, I could have my son who's 18 look at this, and I think he'd probably have the same reaction. So,
yeah, I don't think that's fair. Krista also has her hand up too. Go for Krista.
Yeah, sorry, I just wrote it in the chat as well. I'm just wondering if this is kind of similar to Slido. I'm not sure if anyone's used that before. Mm-hmm. It's a tool that my company's used a few times where you can post a question and people can write in their own answers and others can upvote them as they're going. Is this something kind of similar to it? It sort of looks like that with this, this one gets my vote. Yes, just with a whole lot more pictures, like you said.
My guess is Slido.
That's what. You've used it too. Go ahead. You've used Slido, right?
Yeah, my guess is that the voting table, which hasn't been released yet, is something that's going to be somewhat similar, where you can put in that table of items and have them upvote them, but it's not here yet.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that inline polling capability, I think, will help toward that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely very early days, and they're marketing like this doesn't exist yet. They're marketing things that they haven't yet built, and that's always an interesting exercise.
I had an interesting conversation with a Microsoft employee yesterday, and I was kind of bitching about like how 1.0 MVP, maybe a beta type of product this was. And his comment to me was that the inception of the idea of building this came from the beginning of the pandemic and the EDU SKU, and trying to replicate a bunch of those classroom experiences and, student teacher experiences that they were going to lose from having to be online virtual, sort of the brainstorming sessions, the students putting their names and ideas in lists and stuff like that. So when he said that to me, I was like, oh, okay, that helps me sort of frame where these features came from. And it makes more sense from that perspective. But I think then we also still have the challenge of like translating what is a school type experience to the business world, and how does that sort of translate, if that makes sense. And Mike, you've got your hand up too. Go for Mike.
I just wanted to say I find this whole concept really fascinating. And I kind of view it, hopefully, if this is the direction that it evolves to, like web parts that you can put in Teams and emails.
Yeah.
Which I think is a really interesting concept.
I think that's fair, except for the dynamic nature of the data. And I think we're getting to that, so maybe I should.
Yep. Next slide, Mike.
Okay. So we've talked about components, alerts, pages, and then last is workspaces.
Another wrapper on the outside of pages, right? So you get a whole workspace. This to me sort of looks like a OneNote that somebody's smearing a crayon all over. Let's drop some more emojis into our OneNotes. But it's
I was just thinking my Word documents didn't have enough emojis.
Yeah,
so maybe this is
enough animation. Yep. And actually, Julie, that thing that you heard from somebody yesterday, the fact that it came from education, that almost makes the targeting make more sense. They're showing us something that was aimed at 7-year-olds.
Yeah.
Well,
now
I think they more mean high
bit
school
better
and college, but still, yes, the validity of the relationship between a teacher and students versus an enterprise relationship.
Right.
Yeah. which it does explain the marketing a little bit, but the functionality, like I can think of a bunch of business uses for that. So I'm still trying to wrap my head around the fact that there wasn't a business driver that suggested this.
So we actually do think that there are some use cases, and there's a slide next.
Well, let's look at this slide for a second. Let's go back to this one, because there's a couple things about this one that I think. So one of the problems that we had when we were, like Emily said, she got that alert when Mark assigned her and I a task, but we didn't get any other kind of alerts. We had no way of finding out what was going on. And then Julie's like, well, once we do a bunch of these things, how do we go back and find the thing? Right. And so right now it looks like there is no way to do that. So if Julie, we do this loop thing a bunch of times and Julie's like, oh, there's a task list. There is no way for Julie to figure out where that task list was and go back to it. And it looks like this screenshot that we're looking at now is part of the Microsoft marketing thing off the loop page. And it looks like that's what this will do, this loop workspace, when it comes out. It looks like that left rail there is going to be all the different places and then the different loop types that are in that place. And so this will end up being, once loops take off and, take over the world, this is how we'll try to find what loops we're being looped in on. It's kind of what we're assuming.
Well done.
Don't encourage him.
Yeah. Bring it. Yeah. So I think I think it's going to be necessary.
I think that'll only be the case though if we glue components into pages and pages into workspaces. We can still have these transitive components that maybe in a meeting chat, or I'm sorry, in a group chat that we're all sort of hammering in our emojis really fast. We come up with something that's useful, and then we're sort of done with it, right? It's a way for us to sort of mini collaborate really, really quickly. That to me is one of the sort of overarching thoughts about this whole thing. It's not for more permanent stuff or serious stuff. Like you wouldn't write an HR policy with a loop, probably.
Well, so if you look, so I get what you're saying, but if you look under project overview, the first one there is marketing guidelines for blah. So that looks like they're trying to see it's pricing strategy. So it looks like they're trying to position.
Well, again,
wouldn't that imply that there's a component in that document though?
Right. Yeah. And so, and to your point, Mark, I think, and I can't remember, I don't know if you meant that the loops wouldn't show up in here or they would show up in here, but it's not where you would look for them. I see these being anchored to teams, the marketing team, the designs team. So I'm guessing whether we want them to be, ephemeral or not, they're going to show up in here because of wherever they were created. So like the one that we had yesterday would be created somewhere from that meeting or something.
Yeah.
I know that was a meeting though, so that wasn't.
Yeah. My thought process though is there's got to be a way to close one down, and maybe we're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
And ways to find them after the fact.
Well,
So
yeah,
that's right now.
That's what this is, right? That's what this workspace is.
We don't know.
Oh, we don't see a search experience here. Yeah.
Yeah, Microsoft hasn't made any formal claim about how loops would appear or not appear in the workspace. So I think it's all conjecture right now.
Sure.
You can currently find loops through OneDrive. So whoever creates it, it's saved to their OneDrive. So whether I am someone who has access to the loop or whether I'm someone who created it, both will appear in my OneDrive. So as long as you search for words in the loop or the title, that will show up in your results. So for example, I created one with Derek a while ago. It's in his OneDrive, but it still shows up in my OneDrive search results because I have access to it.
No way.
Way. It does take a little bit of time.
Well, and it does. So I'm looking now, it shows up in my all content, my content, it does show up in there.
In office.com, Todd?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was my question. Good. Okay.
Yeah. So I went to my content and then under all, it was, the most recently modified. All the other hard work I'm doing, but then that one shows up there too.
Okay.
That's good. We didn't pick up on that yesterday. I'm glad you circled back.
I thought I looked and couldn't find it, so that's good to know.
It takes time. When Mike and I first initially did this testing, within about a half hour of him creating the loop on his side, I wasn't able to find it in my search results. Admittedly, a couple days went by after that where I didn't check, but I can confirm now that I can see it. So I'm not sure how much time it takes when you're just one of the contributors and you're not the owner. If you're the owner, it shows up near immediate in your search results.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Some sort of indexing language.
and they're .fluid files, because originally this was called the Fluid Framework.
All right, let's talk use cases. I love the first one. I mean, Julie, you and I, for years, have I worded this email right? Let me know what you think. And then it's like, do you dump it into Teams and have somebody edit it there because there's not really good track changes there? Do you shove it into a Word document, then email the Word document to somebody? The ability to work collaboratively in line within a Teams chat or an email in real time, I think is great. Like, I think that's a terrific use case for this.
Yeah, as I was just searching my OneDrive as we were talking, I found a paragraph that Emily and I were working on together, where we were writing an email to one of our clients, and we both had some sort of questions about how we should phrase something, and so we were using Loop to reword it, and it really worked nicely. It was a constructive way to do it without having to fire up a Word document or email the email back and forth, which is what we've historically done. Worked out really well, with some caveats which are coming up.
Does this look right to you?
Yeah.
Yep. Let's talk about agenda build. Let's talk about the other use cases. Who has input on the others?
Well, I don't know that it's on here, but and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn too much. I can think of business cases where you would want to embed data from a previous thing into a new document. So like what I'm thinking of is things like SEC filings, quarterly reports, where you have to take whatever the stuff was from last quarter and put it in this quarter and then show what this quarter stuff is. I can see building documents with those kind of components inside of them to make sure that all the numbers stay the same and everything's consistent.
Sort of like the old embedding, like where you'd copy a little chunk of a spreadsheet out and paste it into a Word document or something.
Exactly.
Like that.
Yep.
Ole embedding.
Yes.
To show
object
our
linking
age.
and embedding. Yes.
Ole.
Couldn't
help myself.
Yeah, so I can see things like that. Having having PowerPoints that have pieces of data that are someplace else, but they're always updated live because they're a Loop component or something. Yeah.
For building an agenda right now, since you can only do it in a Teams chat, that's a pretty late agenda because you're probably doing it after your meeting has started. But in the future, they did say it's coming to Outlook meeting invites. So I can see how that would be really helpful to have it embedded there. And then, for example, we have a team meeting every Friday at Sympraxis, and we have an open amount of time where we each might have a topic we want to bring up. So instead of always emailing that one person who's the meeting lead, you can just pop your agenda item right there into the meeting invite itself.
And think about that combined with Find Time, right? So we can collaboratively work on the calendaring part and the content part in line. That would be pretty cool, I think. Or whatever the successor to Find Time is, right?
I think it's just generic meeting poll.
Yeah.
Want to address Krista's question in the chat that Sean effectively answered, but just to voice it, so if you can't see the chat, Krista had asked where the Loop components are stored. Are they just part of the chat thread? Are they files added to the creator's OneDrive? Yada, yada. Sean showed that with a screenshot that you can, in the OneDrive, filter by Loop components, which is cool. I hadn't seen that yet, but effectively, I believe that we did determine that whoever creates it, it's stored in their OneDrive. Is that correct? Or does Teams have a different storage mechanism for them when you add them to the team?
Just OneDrive as of right now. So I think my guess is the reason we don't have them in channels yet is because they have to figure out the back end of where they're going to be saved, because it doesn't make sense to put it in your OneDrive the way they are right now.
Yeah. I would think they put it in the files. Go ahead.
Yeah. So when we did the one yesterday, it was in a meeting which didn't have any kind of group foundation. Have you guys done them in the past where you've done it in a group supported channel, and does it still show up in OneDrive, or since that there is a place for it to show up, does it get stored in the Teams?
You can't do them in channels yet, so we can't test that.
So only
you can only do them in meetings right now. Yeah.
Microsoft.
I know, but it'll be cool when it comes to channels.
These other use
Early-
cases, that town hall quick poll is kind of the scenario that we just talked about what Slido does. I think there's other and better polling capabilities elsewhere, whether it's third-party tools. I think there's some things native to Teams and or to Forms, right, for doing polls. But that inline quick poll, I guess it's a common use case. I'm not crazy about that one. Does anybody have experience to the contrary?
I think we'd have to see how it really works. Because
Yeah.
I mean, it's a component they've shown in an animation, but we haven't actually seen how it plays.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I could definitely see that on some I think I've been on a couple of different meetings where, we've been asked to go do some homework and then report back. And I think that you could use that sort of quick poll functionality in that way. So we're going to take a break. Everybody go do 5 things, come up with 3 ideas and either, do it as a brainstorming list or, here are the 3. What do you think? What's your 1, 2, and 3? What's your poll?
Like a
So I think
breakout,
you
Derek.
you could do it
Okay.
like that. I mean, I think my big issue with all of these is, with the exception of like the micro co-authoring, is really the temporal nature of all of these things. So if we were to put these in our Teams chat, right, they would get lost because we have an everyone group. If you wanted to put a poll in there, that poll would be lost before the middle of the day.
Mm-hmm.
So you'd have to find it to go respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that's sort of the point, right? These things don't live for a long time, though they do get stored in your OneDrive, so they're sort of permanent. But they have a limited lifespan. Otherwise, you would probably create a document, right?
But that's
They
the
have limited
problem.
lifespan.
They don't
but they're
actually have limited lifespan.
Exactly.
Well,
they're constantly
They do,
open.
but don't.
And that's actually one of our sort of worries or complaints or beefs or whatever you want to call it on the next slide, which is, how do you end one of these things? If you've got a poll and you want people to, okay, it's like, okay, now we know what everyone feels, and somebody goes and changes their answer, then is the poll wrong? Well, no, it was right at the time. And so that is a sort of quandary that we've kicked around many times as we've discussed this.
Or
I might be
creating
the
an
only.
agenda.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Emily.
I might be the only Sympraxian that's not concerned about ending a loop. So I remember when we came out with OneNote and everybody would freak out because they wanted to freeze the moment in time of the meeting notes at the end of a meeting. And everyone was concerned someone's going to delete their action items, they're going to change the notes, they're going to change this record of history. And I've never had a client who has that kind of an issue. And it became a bit more of a social agreement where people understand that after that meeting that's done and you only update it for corrections. And if someone was doing something for bad reasons, we have version history and we could see who did it, what date and time. So we have that same ability in Loop. So I personally am not worried about that rare edge case of someone editing it after the fact or needing to have that end. And kind of like Chris has said in the comments, OneNote code of conduct, I do think it's a little bit of a social agreement in an organization.
I completely agree, Emily, except for the ones when the idea will be that it would be embedded in like an Office doc, like a Word doc or an Excel doc, that kind of stuff. Like the doc itself inherently has sort of these points in time, right? And especially if we're using versioning or whatever else, with the sort of nature of this section that's dynamic with the rest of it sort of being managed differently, that's where the end of the loop part really starts to concern me. But I agree with you with some of the rest of the stuff where it's really that micro co-authoring type of vibe. Yeah, you should just have a social agreement. I agree with that.
Well, do we get versioning? Do we get some kind of tracking with a loop? We do. Okay.
You do, yeah.
Okay.
Because it's versioning
I
just like
that.
Yeah, it's just like any of other OneDrive files where you have that version history. So
okay.
Some of the documentation that they have, for example, is like, oh, what if it becomes corrupt? You can go back and also restore a previous version of a loop.
Yep, I'm looking at it in my OneDrive right now, and yeah, it's absolutely there. Every time I've typed it, it's created another major version.
But a more crisp version of that is needed if we're going to have loops integrated with Office files so that it can be encased in Amber and like memorialized, right? Promoted out of that ephemeral give and take.
I think,
quote,
yeah,
micro-authoring. Yeah.
that's exactly what I want,
model.
Mike, is to basically be able to say, okay, we're done. And
snapshot.
Whatever this is what it is.
Yeah.
Mike Dixon just said, what happens to a loop in chat when the creator deletes the file from their OneDrive? Would that effectively end the loop? Yeah, but then you lose it.
Yeah, you deleted the file. It doesn't exist. So like,
right. So you don't even have
over,
it.
but yeah, so is your content, right?
It's in the recycle bin.
Yeah.
Well, yes. But you could
so that's a
copy
real question. So does somebody still see it and they can type stuff and it's changing in the recycle bin? I don't think so, but
I'm laughing at
if a loop falls in the forest and no one is there to hear it.
And I will say, because it's in OneDrive, I tried with Derek to end the loop. And I did a bunch of different things with changing the link style, changing who has access to it. Essentially, you cannot do it. Once you change the access, if you change it to specific people, someone who previously had access still will have access, and it's a documented known issue on the support.microsoft.com page. Then if you remove everybody's access, you also remove anything anyone has typed. So it essentially goes back to version 1 of when you created it without those contributions. So I think the short answer is like there is no ending of a loop as of right now without losing your content.
All right, we're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm going to zip forward to talk about some of the places where there's interference, maybe between loop and other things that we're using today.
I'll grab the first one because I think it's a debate of what to use when, right? And now Microsoft has introduced yet another tool to us, so we're going to have to determine when's that right situation. And I think that micro co-authoring is a good way to designate it, where you're doing something small, it's very temporal. You've heard us voice through this episode a lot of concern around having it a more formal document with a loop component and not being able to end it. So if it's a formal document, as of right now, for how loop stands, I would say I wouldn't use loop in those situations. I would just use co-authoring with things like version history and track changes in a Word document, for example.
And we talked about planner and to do, like that task list looks lovely in loop, but it's not connected to do. So those tasks are never going to show up as tasks to do for me or in planner. So there's definitely some, yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah. For where we are today.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Anything else we want to touch on here?
Well, I think in each of these cases, there's a loop component that can, it sort of has an older sibling somewhere else in the Microsoft 365 stack, right? You've got a paragraph. Well, that's a Word document. You've got a bulleted list. That's sort of like a spreadsheet-ish sort of thing, but not really. A
poll. You've got a form.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So it's like this little thing that's transitive versus something that's a little more involved and can be preserved in Amber for in a more significant way.
Yeah.
Quick look into. Go ahead, Todd. Yep.
I was going to say in the chat, Krista asked if there's any new functionality, and I would argue that all of it is future functionality. We were talking yesterday. We were struggling to talk about where this is useful and all the shortcomings. That really what we're watching right now is just the foundation being built, and then trying to comment on what the house is going to look like. And it's not there yet. And as I thought about that after we talked about it, it reminds me a lot of Delve when they first released Delve 100 years ago. They're like, oh, this is going to be, game changing. And I looked at that and I'm like, this is worthless. Like there's nothing here. And now we're a couple of years later and they've worked Delve and the graph and other things. And now it's useful. And now it's something I use all the time. I think we're at the Delve stage of Loop right now. So it's all future functionality. At least that's how it feels.
Sorry, Todd. My question was, are they going to charge for future functionality? Is it going to be a paid service when the new features are released? Sorry for the confusion.
if you could go into Teams and edit your message so that it's the question that I just answered instead of the question you actually asked,
Will do.
Guests
that
can't
would
edit.
be
If
amazing.
if you'd asked your question in the loop component, Todd could change it for you.
Krista, I
Todd.
don't like your question, so I'm going to answer a different question. I'm thinking about running for office at some time, so I'm,
Yeah. Yeah, you're practicing. Good job. All right.
So to some of what's coming, this I think we pasted in here. Expecting to see this month, the ability to start to use Loop components in Outlook email.
Yep. And
I
some
just
more
wanna-
stuff that's down below.
Yeah, it's not updating the slide, but
Ah.
there's a bunch of stuff that's been announced or advertised in that preview that are not on the roadmap at all, which is super helpful. So like external access for guests, Loop coming in Teams channels, Loop in OneNote, Whiteboard in Office Docs, the voting table, the status tracker, and then Loop in the meeting invites of Outlook. So they say it's coming, but we have no dates or way to know.
Got it. I know we're at the top of the hour, so more information in the resources that we talked about. Also, I think Matt Wade's probably published his presentation. He's done a few user group presentations that were outstanding on this. Put a plug for Matt and a shout out. But also our next topic. So every single time we talk to people about a SharePoint-based intranet, they talk about, well, there's people and a place where we need to go to work on content, and then a place where people need to consume it from. Can they be the same? Should they be different, etc.? So that's 2 weeks from now. Where does collaboration end and communication begin in terms of managing your content? Anything else? Nothing live for us until the end of September. We should probably put collab days in here too. It's around that same time frame. Late October, mid-October. Anything else to add? A lot to cover today. A lot of new stuff. Some of it's conjecture and our own experiences, but thank you for bringing questions and your own as well.
Try to bring some reality to the marketing, though, don't we?
Fewer emojis,
all right.
at least.
Yeah.
All righty. Thanks, everybody.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for joining.